Today, you're going to watch the best movie of every year. From the dawn of sound cinema in 1927 to 2024, these are the greatest films in history. The ones that not only revolutionized cinema, but also shaped popular culture. Films that, in some cases, were unimaginable at the time of their release. So sit back, because today on Cine Prime. Now, let's go back to the beginning of sound cinema. We arrive in 1927, the year the first sound film was released.
Oh, I'm going to take you to Coney Island.
But this movie is far from the best of that year. That honor belongs to Metropolis, a groundbreaking film that gave us a terrifying vision of the future. The following year, the final masterpiece of silent cinema was released, reaching its peak and dying with the face of Maria Falconetti. Then came the film that cemented surrealism's place in cinema, sparking scandal upon release. Chaplin refused to abandon silent cinema and left us with one of his greatest works. Gangster films reached a new level of violence and realism. And special effects were changed forever with the arrival of the Great Ape. Modern romantic comedies were born with this classic from Capra. The Marx Brothers redefined comedy with their controlled chaos. Chaplin criticized capitalism and industrialization in one of his most iconic films. A coming-of-age adventure story demonstrated the power of classic cinema. The screwball comedy reached its peak with Hepburn and Grant. And then, Hollywood delivered the ultimate blockbuster, an epic wartime romance.
God is my witness, they're not going to lick me. I'm going to live through this, and when it's all over, I'll never be hungry again.
That thanks to its incredible color technique, still looks better than many films from the 70s.
But I'll think of some way to get him back. After all, tomorrow is another day.
We close the 1930s and enter one of the darkest decades in cinema history, a time of war and lost hope. The 1940s were overshadowed by war, and cinema reflected that darkness. Film noir flourished, portraying a world of distrust and fatalism, while war films and propaganda showed us the harsh realities of a world in conflict. Chaplin had the courage to challenge Hitler, satirizing him at the height of Nazi power, creating one of cinema's greatest films. The most revolutionary movie in film history, changing everything. Love, war, and sacrifice were at the heart of the ultimate romantic classic.
Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Danish cinema explored fear and persecution in troubled times. Film noir reached its peak with a story of betrayal and desire, directed by Billy Wilder. Italian neorealism was born in the devastation of World War II. A Christmas classic reminded us of the importance of life itself. Orson Welles took film noir to its most experimental and expressionist extremes. Neorealism showed us everyday tragedy through something as simple as a stolen bicycle. The Cold War and betrayal were captured in a ruined Vienna, accompanied by one of the best film scores of all time. With that, we close a decade marked by war and despair and enter an era where cinema was reborn, where auteur filmmaking emerged. The 1950s were a decade of contrasts. In Hollywood, cinema thrived with big stars, technicolor, and epic spectacles. But something new was emerging. In the shadows, visionary directors broke the rules, birthing auteur cinema. Many filmmakers began to leave their mark, proving that cinema wasn't just entertainment. It was art, vision, and deeply personal. Wilder crafted a scathing critique of Hollywood's decay in this dark tale of oblivion. Marlon Brando revolutionized acting with his incredible intensity.
Hey, Stella!
Kurosawa reminded us that every day matters in this deeply moving story. Ozu captured the essence of family and the passage of time with simplicity and beauty. Action and adventure films were forever changed by this grand epic. A thriller dared to portray a serial killer hunting children. John Ford redefined the Western with a story of revenge and redemption. A single setting, 12 men, and a perfect script about justice and morality. Hitchcock created a masterpiece, one of the greatest films in history. One of the greatest comedies of all time, with a perfect ending.
I'm a man.
Well, nobody's perfect.
Now, we enter the decade where auteur cinema became the norm, marking the death of classic Hollywood. The 1960s signaled the end of classical cinema. Hollywood lost its power, stars no longer dictated the rules, and studios no longer had control. Instead, directors took over, making films that were freer, more experimental, more personal. This was the decade when cinema changed forever. Horror was redefined with a film about a mentally disturbed killer, featuring one of the most iconic scenes in history. Billiards had never been so cinematic as in this story of ambition and downfall. The Western evolved from action-packed spectacle to philosophical storytelling. Kurosawa elevated film noir to an art form with this tense, socially charged story. Kubrick turned Cold War fears into an irreverent black comedy. Spaghetti westerns proved they could be as stylish as they were brutal. The soundtrack and the final duel were forever etched in history. A war film that explored internal conflict just as much as battlefield action. Cinema ceased to be mere entertainment and became a cosmic and philosophical experience, creating the science fiction genre as we know it today. The classic Western died with this violent revisionist film, a major influence on Tarantino. Now, we arrive at the decade where modern cinema took shape, setting the rules that define film to this day. If the 60s shattered classical cinema, the 1970s built something entirely new. This was the era of rebellious directors who took over Hollywood and reshaped it in their vision, free from censorship. Coppola, Scorsese, Spielberg, Lucas, Kubrick, and Polanski permanently changed storytelling. Cinema became grittier, rawer, and more ambitious. Buñuel continued to challenge morality and desire with his provocative films. Kubrick took us into a disturbing, violent dystopia, shocking an entire generation. Cinema reached perfection with The Godfather, solidifying itself as the greatest film of all time. Redford and Newman turned a heist into pure entertainment, featuring one of the best plot twists ever. A Shakespearean tragedy about power and betrayal, The Godfather Part II arguably surpassed its predecessor. Kubrick transformed every frame into a painting with his most visually ambitious work, taking period films to new heights. Scorsese and De Niro created the ultimate portrait of alienation and descent into madness. Blockbuster cinema changed forever with the arrival of this space opera, one of the most iconic films of all time. A brutal film about the psychological aftermath of the war. A hellish war odyssey that left us with the greatest battle sequence in film history. Now, we enter the era where cinema became a spectacle, where ideas reached their peak, and the most creative decade in history unfolded. The 1980s turned film into a global phenomenon. It was the era of blockbusters, franchises, impossible heroes, and groundbreaking special effects. Cinema became bigger, louder, and more unforgettable. Raging Bull gave us a fierce and poetic portrait of a man's downfall, where Scorsese and De Niro took cinema to its highest artistic expression. Spielberg redefined adventure with the most charismatic hero in cinema. Cyberpunk was born with this visual and philosophical masterpiece, which still raises questions to this day. Pacino and De Palma elevated gangster cinema to an excess-filled spectacle with perfect aesthetics. Sergio Leone closed his career with a nostalgic and epic tale of life through crime. Kurosawa adapted King Lear into one of the most visually striking films in history. David Lynch turned the American dream into an extremely immersive surrealist nightmare. Kubrick criticized warmongering with an unprecedented harshness. Animated cinema reached its most tragic point with this story about war. Woody Allen mixed drama and comedy in one of his most cynical and profound films. We now arrive at what I consider the best decade in cinema, where stories became more cynical and daring.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
The 90s were a fusion of the classic and the modern. Independent cinema became big, digital effects changed the rules, and stories became bolder. It was the decade where cinema looked to the future without forgetting its past. Scorsese reinvented mafia cinema with frenetic pacing and narration, brutal realism, and direction that changed everything. Hannibal Lecter redefined the psychological thriller with his terrifying gaze. Clint Eastwood dismantled the myth of the Western with a raw portrayal of the Old West. Spielberg brought the Holocaust to cinema with a harshness never seen before, leading to one of the most moving films in history. Tarantino revolutionized narrative and dialogue in cinema with pure style and extreme violence.
Well, you gotta have an opinion. I mean, do you think that God came down from heaven and stopped? Oh!
Police thrillers reached a new dimension with Fincher's nihilism and an astonishing ending. The Coen brothers created a cold black comedy full of unforgettable characters. Cinema showed that it could find beauty even in the darkest times. Racism and redemption in a striking drama about neo-Nazism with an unforgettable performance by Edward Norton. The complete subversion of commercial cinema with an incendiary message about identity and consumerism. With the death of the second millennium came a new era, with a mix of nostalgia and digital revolution. The 2000s were the decade of global cinema, where blockbusters dominated the box office and digital technology transformed the way stories were told. The film that best portrays the hell of drugs, disturbing and devastating. David Lynch took surrealism, dreams, and the ability to create emotions to its highest expression. Brazilian cinema showed the violence of the favelas with a frantic and extremely raw style. The legendary epic story had its best closure with this masterpiece by Peter Jackson. Drama and boxing fused in a tough story of sacrifice and loss. Woody Allen left New York to make his most elegant and fatalistic thriller. Scorsese returned with a police thriller full of tension and betrayal with an incredible cast. Daniel Day-Lewis gave the best performance of all time in a drama about ambition and oil.
I've abandoned my child! I've abandoned my child!
Superhero cinema became serious, dark, and transcendental with Heath Ledger's Joker. Tarantino rewrote history with his violent and stylized version of World War II. And finally, we arrive at the new era, the current cinema. Although we are in challenging times for cinema, great masterpieces continue to be released, but you have to know where to look in an era where quantity prevails over quality. Nolan took science fiction and storytelling to another level with his exploration of the dream world. Terrence Malick filmed a visual meditation on life, memory, and the cosmos. Mads Mikkelsen starred in a psychological drama about paranoia and social justice. Scorsese turned excess and corruption into a fiercely entertaining comedy. Nolan combined science and emotion in his most ambitious space odyssey. Action cinema reached its highest expression with this post-apocalyptic visual opera. The musical returned with a modern love story and dreams in Hollywood. Pixar celebrated Mexican culture with an emotional story about memory and family. Psychological horror reached a new peak with this disturbing and revolutionary family story. Bong Joon-ho mixed genres and social critiques in a global phenomenon, leaving us with an absolutely masterful ending. Alzheimer's had never been shown with such sensitivity and harshness. Villeneuve took science fiction to an epic level with his vision of Frank Herbert's work. War was told again with brutal and devastating realism. Animation broke all the rules with a revolutionary visual style. And finally, we arrive at 2024 with a daring film that, through unique direction and storytelling, explores the obsession with youth. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, leave a like, subscribe, and comment what you thought. For this video, I had to download 100 films, and it is undoubtedly the hardest video I've worked on, but it was worth it.